Okay, so, for everyone listening, I think it's safe to say we all love to, well, dive deep, right? And I think for a lot of us, that means getting philosophical.
Absolutely. And when it comes to philosophy, sometimes uh, it's hard to know where to even begin. But I think tackling the big questions, head on can be, well, really rewarding.
Definitely. And there's no bigger question than, well, cause and effect. I mean, it's how we make sense of the world, how we understand, like, what happens and why.
Yeah. And when you talk about cause and effect, two names immediately come to mind. Two giants of philosophy, David Hume and Immanuel Kant.
Exactly. And today we're going to explore their legendary debate on the nature of cause and effect. And we're lucky enough to be working with a fantastic resource for this.
Right. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a great entry on just this topic, Kant and Hume, on causality.
So for this deep dive, our mission, you could say, is to really unpack Hume's challenge to causality. Like, why did he doubt it? And then we'll explore how Kant tried to answer him.
Exactly. And more importantly, we want to see why this centuries-old philosophical debate still matters today. What can we learn from it?
So let's start, I guess, at the beginning with Hume.
Right. So Kant himself actually said that Hume's work, specifically his analysis of cause and effect, awoke him from his dogmatic slumber.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. I mean, it suggests that Hume's ideas were like a major wake-up call for Kant.
Yeah, they really were. They completely changed the direction of Kant's philosophical thinking.
Yeah.
So to understand Kant, you got to start with Hume.
Okay, so what was so earth-shattering about Hume's view of causality? Why was it such a big deal?
Well, Hume was very interested in the connection of cause and effect. I mean, it's fundamental to how we understand the world, right?
Right. Like, if I drop my phone, I expect it to fall because, well, gravity, that's cause and effect.
Exactly. But Hume argued that if you really think about it, a cause and its effect are actually two totally separate events. They're distinct.
Okay. So how does that work?
He uses this example of billiard balls. One ball hits another and the second ball moves. That's what we observe.
Right. Classic cause and effect.
But Hume says, just by looking at the first ball, you wouldn't know for sure that the second ball would move, in that particular way. The connection isn't obvious just from looking.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't know how fast it would move or even like if it would move at all. Maybe it's like super glued to the table or something.
Exactly. You can't figure out the effect just by analyzing the cause. They're separate things. And Hume made a big distinction between relations of ideas and matters of fact.
Okay, so relations of ideas, I'm guessing, are things you can know just by thinking about them, like 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's true no matter what.
Precisely, like math or logic. But matters of fact depend on our experience of the world. And for Hume, cause and effect falls into that category. It's something you have to observe. You can't just reason your way to it beforehand.
So you're saying we can't just like sit in an armchair and figure out cause and effect relationships. We actually have to go out and see them happen in the world.
That's Hume's point. You can't know it a priori, that's the fancy term, meaning before experience.
Okay, I see. So how does Hume explain how we come to believe in cause and effect if we can't reason our way to it?
He introduces this idea of constant conjunction.
Constant conjunction. Okay, that sounds interesting. What's that about?
So it's like this. We see certain events happening together over and over again. The sun rises, then it gets warmer, we eat, then we feel full.
Right, patterns.
Yeah, and through these repetitions, our minds start to connect these events. We assume that one causes the other because, well, they always seem to go together.
It's like our brains are wired to look for patterns, and then we kind of, I don't know, jump to the conclusion that one thing causes the other just because they always happen together.
That's pretty much it. And Hume even argues that the feeling of necessity we attach to cause and effect, that one event must follow the other, that's not something we actually observe.
Really? I mean, it seems pretty obvious sometimes. Like, if you hit a glass hard enough with a hammer, it's going to break. Seems pretty necessary.
I know, it feels that way. But Hume says that feeling comes from custom or habit. It's our minds getting used to seeing things happen in a certain order and then expecting it to always happen that way. It's a subjective necessity, not an objective one.
So the necessity isn't out there in the world, it's in our heads.
That's what Hume's saying. And this leads him to his famous skepticism about induction.
Ah, induction. That's the whole just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it'll happen in the future, right?
Exactly. And if our belief in cause and effect is just based on habit, on what we've observed before, then there's no guarantee that the future will be like the past.
Okay, so that's Hume's big challenge. He's saying our understanding of cause and effect is shaky at best. Now, where does Kant come in? How does he try to rescue causality from Hume's skepticism?
Well, you could say Kant saw Hume's challenge as a gauntlet thrown down, and Kant was not one to back down from a philosophical duel.
So, what was Kant's strategy? How did he approach this problem?
His aim was pretty ambitious. He wanted to, and I quote, remove the Humean doubt from the ground up. And he did this by focusing on what he called synthetic a priori judgments.
Synthetic a priori judgments. Okay, maybe we need to unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So synthetic means that the predicate of a judgment adds new information to the subject. It's not just defining something, it's saying something new about it.
Okay, I think I get that. And a priori.
That means that the knowledge is independent of experience. It's not something you learn from observing the world. It's something you know, well, sort of innately.
So is Kant saying we are just born knowing certain things about cause and effect?
Not exactly. It's more subtle than that. See, Kant agreed with Hume that the connection between cause and effect isn't analytic, meaning you can't just figure out the effect by looking at the cause.
Right, we talked about that with the billiard balls.
Exactly. But Kant argued that Hume missed a crucial possibility, that this connection, while not analytic, could still be known a priori. In other words, it's something that our minds bring to experience, rather than something we derive from experience.
Okay, so Kant is saying there's another way to know things besides just, like, observing the world or figuring things out logically.
Yes. Kant believed that our minds aren't just passive receivers of information. Our understanding actively structures our experience. He called these the pure concepts of the understanding, or categories. And guess what one of those categories is?
Causality.
Bingo. Causality, for Kant, is a fundamental way that our minds organize and make sense of the world.
So we're not born with a specific idea of cause, but rather the very way our minds work is based on this concept of causality.
Exactly. It's like a built-in operating system for our thinking. It's how we connect events and understand why things happen. And Kant went on to distinguish between judgments of perception and judgments of experience.
Okay, more jargon to unpack. I'm guessing judgments of perception are like just our personal opinions.
More like just our immediate sense impressions. This sunset is beautiful.
Absolutely.
That's subjective, right?
Totally. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder and all that.
Exactly. But judgments of experience go beyond that. They claim to be objective and universally valid, like the sun sets in the west.
Ah, okay. That's not just my opinion. It's a fact, a scientific fact.
Right. And that kind of judgment relies on a shared understanding of the world, structured by these fundamental concepts like space, time, and, you guessed it, causality.
So Kant is saying that our understanding of causality allows us to move from just like personal perceptions to objective knowledge.
Exactly. The category of causality is applied a priori to our perceptions, transforming them into objectively necessary connections. Think back to the sun and the stone example.
Right. The sun warms the stone.
Hume would say we see the sun and then we feel the warmth, and through repetition we connect them. But Kant says to move from that subjective observation to the objective judgment the sun causes the stone to warm, we're applying this a priori concept of cause. It's like we're adding the idea of cause to make it into a universal law.
So it's not just that we see the sun and then feel warmth a bunch of times and then like our brains make the connection.
Right. Kant is saying that our very understanding of the world is based on these fundamental categories, including causality, and that allows us to move beyond just associating events to understanding them as causally connected. And that, for Kant, is a huge difference.
So Hume says experience comes first, and we build our understanding of cause and effect from there. But Kant is flipping the script. He's saying that our understanding of cause and effect actually shapes our experience.
You got it. As Kant himself put it, this is a completely reversed kind of connection which never occurred to Hume. So, for Kant, our experience of the world isn't the source of our understanding of causality. It's the other way around. Our understanding of causality is what makes objective experience possible in the first place.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea. Okay, so we've got Hume saying causality is based on habit, and Kant saying it's an a priori category of the understanding. Now, how do these two views handle the concepts of necessity and universality?
Right, those are key. So Hume, as we discussed, thought that the necessity we feel about cause and effect is just a subjective feeling. It comes from seeing things happen the same way over and over again. But Kant argues that this kind of habitual necessity isn't enough. It can't explain the real objective necessity that we see in causal connections.
I see. So Kant thinks there's a difference between just feeling like something has to happen and it actually like objectively having to happen.
Exactly. He draws a distinction between comparative universality, which is based on induction, and strict universality. Comparative universality is like saying, as far as we know, there have never been any exceptions to this rule. But strict universality is a stronger claim. It's saying that there can't logically be any exceptions.
So for Hume, universality is based on how much we've observed, but for Kant, it's about like the logical structure of the universe.
Exactly. Kant argues that true causality involves this strict universality. And to drive this point home, he introduces what he calls the analogies of experience.
Analogies of experience. Okay, what are those?
They're basically fundamental principles that govern how we experience the world in time. One of them, the second analogy, states, all alterations take place in accordance with the law of the connection of cause and effect.
So that's Kant's fancy way of saying everything that happens has a cause.
Pretty much. And he considers this to be a synthetic a priori principle. It's a foundational rule for how we understand events in time. It's not something we learn from experience, it's something we bring to experience, something that makes experience possible.
Okay, so if this general principle of causality is a priori, does that mean Kant thinks that all specific causal laws are also a priori?
It's a great question. And the answer is no. Kant doesn't think we're born knowing all the specific laws of physics or chemistry. He's making a more subtle point.
Okay, so help me understand this. How does Kant connect this big a priori principle of causality with all the specific, like, scientific laws that we discover?
He explains that empirical laws, the ones scientists figure out, are particular determinations of these pure laws of the understanding. They stand under those more general principles.
So it's like the a priori principle sets up the rules of the game, and then science figures out how the game is played in specific situations.
Perfect analogy. It's like the rule book says there must be a cause for every effect, and then scientists are figuring out the specific causes and effects in different situations.
Makes sense. So Kant wouldn't say we're born knowing that water boils at a certain temperature, but we are born with the understanding that something causes water to boil, and then science figures out the specifics.
Precisely. And to explain this further, Kant introduces the postulates of empirical thought. The third one focuses on necessity, stating that whose coherence with the actual is determined in accordance with the general conditions of experience exists as necessary. Basically, he's saying that the necessity of specific causal laws comes from how well they fit into the overall structure of our experience, a structure that's shaped by our a priori understanding, including causality.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the picture here. So both Hume and Kant were influenced by Newton's work in science, right?
Absolutely. Both saw Newtonian science as this incredible achievement, but of course they had different interpretations of its foundations.
Right, because they disagree about the nature of causality itself.
Exactly. So Hume, being a good empiricist, thought that Newton's laws, like the laws of motion, were based on observation and induction. Like, we see things move in a certain way, and we generalize from that.
But Kant, I'm guessing, saw it differently.
Yes, he argued that some of Newton's laws, especially the laws of motion, were actually synthetic a priori truths. He even tried to prove them a priori, meaning he thought they weren't just based on observation, but were actually grounded in the structure of our understanding.
So for Hume, Newton was like the master of observing and generalizing, but for Kant, Newton was uncovering like deep truths about the universe that are built into our minds.
That's a great way to put it. And when it comes to the law of universal gravitation, that inverse square law, Kant acknowledges that it might not be a priori in the same way as the laws of motion. But he still says its necessity and universal validity are grounded in the a priori principles of the understanding.
So even the laws we discover through observation, for Kant, are still ultimately based on the structure of our minds.
Exactly. For Hume, universal gravitation is just another well-supported law. But for Kant, it's made possible, you could say, by the a priori structure of our understanding.
Okay, so now we have to talk about time. How did Hume and Kant's views on causality play into their understanding of time itself?
This is where things get even more interesting. Hume essentially thought of time as just the order in which we experience things. One thing happens after another, and we build associations based on that.
So, like, time is just a sequence of events.
Basically, yeah. But for Kant, that's not enough. He argued that just because we perceive events in a certain order doesn't mean they are objectively related in that order.
So for Kant, my experience of time might not match up with, like, the actual flow of time in the universe.
Not necessarily. For Kant, it's the a priori concept of causality that transforms our subjective experience of time into an objective one. It's causality that allows us to say that one event really happened before another in a way that's true for everyone, not just our personal perception.
So it's not just that events happen in time, it's that our understanding of cause and effect is what gives time its structure, its objectivity.
Exactly. And Kant would say that induction, the repeated observation that Hume emphasizes, can't explain this because true causal connections involve this strict universality and necessity, which can only come from a priori principles. And this difference leads to a really important contrast in their views on the uniformity of nature.
Ah, the uniformity of nature. That's the idea that the laws of physics are the same everywhere and always, right?
Right. Hume thought we just sort of assume this uniformity based on habit. We've seen it hold true in the past, so we assume it'll hold true in the future. But he couldn't find a logical reason why that should be the case.
But I'm guessing Kant had an answer for that.
He did. Kant argued that the uniformity of nature is a necessary condition for us to have any experience of the world at all. He thought that our minds are structured in such a way that we can only experience a world that's governed by consistent laws.
So the uniformity of nature isn't just a convenient assumption, it's like a built-in feature of how we experience the world.
Exactly. And this, again, comes back to the a priori principles of the understanding. These principles, including causality, give us a framework for experiencing the world as a unified and law-governed place.
Wow, okay. So Hume and Kant, two brilliant minds, two very different ways of understanding cause and effect.
It's a profound debate that continues to shape how we think about philosophy, science, and even just how we make sense of our everyday lives.
So let's summarize what we've learned. Hume, the great skeptic, challenged the traditional view of causality, saying it's based on habit and custom, not reason.
And Kant responded with this revolutionary idea that our understanding actively shapes our experience, and that fundamental concepts like causality aren't derived from experience, but are actually preconditions for having objective experience in the first place.
And for you, dear listener, the key takeaway here is that your mind is not just a passive receiver of information, but an active participant in shaping the world you experience.
And understanding the nuances of this debate can help you better understand not only the history of philosophy, but also the way you think and experience the world around you.
And it leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? If Kant is right, what does that mean for the limits of our knowledge? Can we ever truly know reality as it is, or are we always shaping it with our minds?
That's a question for each of us to grapple with. But I think that's the beauty of philosophy. It's about asking the big questions, even if the answers remain elusive.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this philosophical journey, and keep those minds exploring.